was, after all, a Roman colony. Some claim that if Jesus did survive the crucifixion, his first priority would be to escape from the jurisdiction of the Roman Empire.
You just look at a map. Palestine is on the far eastern border of the Roman Empire. If you go west, you're going right into the heart of Roman territory, where we have our 15 legions stationed around the world. If you go east, you're crossing over into Parthia, and you're going towards Persia eventually, and India and Afghanistan, that direction.
And if Jesus thought he was the Jewish Messiah, there was another reason why he might have traveled east.
People forget that the Messiah's got to do essentially two things. Everyone remembers he's got to bring world peace and justice and defeat evil. That's all the way through the prophets. When the Messiah comes, he's the Prince of Peace. But the other huge task is he's got to gather all the scattered tribes of Israel back to the land of Israel. Now, this takes a bit of explaining, but it's not too complicated. The people we know today as the Jews are only one tribe, the tribe of Judah. And we have in the Hebrew Bible the story of 10 of the tribes being taken away to the east, to the northeast, by the Assyrians in the 8th century BC. They become known in history as the lost tribes because nobody knows exactly what happened to them. We do, though, we can speculate that if Jesus thought of himself as the Messiah, he might have had in mind, I've got to go and present myself to these dispersed brothers and sisters off wherever they might be.
The journey east from Israel in the 1st century was surprisingly easy, by land or by sea, on the Silk Route or the Spice Route. It's an accepted fact, for instance, that the disciple Thomas travelled to India and founded a church there.
The great tradition of the Indian church is that it was founded by Thomas the Apostle. To travel to India would be no problem. He just had to go down to Gaza and link up with one of the spice trains returning, and then from Yemen get a boat to India. It would have been a very simple, easy procedure that was done regularly.
And there's another reason Jesus might have been tempted to travel east. But to understand that, we have to go back to the year of his birth. We all recognize the story in Matthew's Gospel of the 3 wise men who followed a star and presented themselves and their gifts to the baby Jesus. What we perhaps don't recognize immediately is the similarity between this story and the traditions of a religion that is 500 years older than Christianity, Buddhism. When a great Buddhist holy man, or Lama, dies, wise men consult the stars and other omens and set off, often on extraordinarily long journeys, to find the infant who is the reincarnation of the Lama. When the child is old enough, he is taken away from his parents and educated in the Buddhist faith. Could this be the origin of the story of the 3 wise men? Could Jesus have been taken to India as a child and taught to be a Buddhist? The Russian writer Nikolai Notovich, traveling in India in the 19th century, discovered an ancient manuscript in a Buddhist monastery in Tibet. In his book, The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ, Notovich translated this manuscript, and it tells of a divine child called Isa, born in the 1st century to a poor family in Israel. Isa came to India at the age of 14, where he learned the laws of Buddhism before returning to Israel at the age of 29. This idea would certainly explain the otherwise odd fact that from the age of 14 to 29, there is absolutely no record of Jesus' existence in Palestine. Certainly, the later teachings and miracles of Jesus have uncanny parallels with the teachings and miracles of the Buddha. Loving your enemies and the idea that the meek will inherit the earth have absolutely no tradition or precedent in Judaism, but they are entirely consistent with Buddhism.
He cometh unto them, walking on the sea. He walks upon the water, without parting it, as if on solid ground. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. Riches make a man greedy, and so are like a caravan, lurching down the road to hell. Lay up for yourselves treasure in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. Let the wise man do righteousness, a treasure that others cannot share, which no thief can steal, a treasure which doth not pass away.
But if Jesus travelled or returned to the east, surely there would be legends, like those in the south of France, to support the idea. And of course, there are such traditions. In fact, the people here in Kashmir call their tribe Ben-e Israel and claim to be descendants of the lost tribes. And here there are stories that in the 1st century, Isa, known locally as Yusasaf, meaning leader of the healed, returned to Kashmir in his 30s. Yusasaf's ministry here can easily be seen as a continuation of the Jesus ministry. In a local temple called the Temple of Solomon, there used to be an inscription which told of Yusasaf's claim, made about 50 AD, to be Jesus, the prophet from Israel.
तमाम कश्मीर की तारीखों में यही लिखा है कि ये बाहर से आया है, ये प्रॉफिट था, ये पैगंबर था और इस्राइल से आया, नस्बैन से अंदर बॉर्डर में आया है और फिर यही तबलीग कर रहा है। वही जीसस है, वही मसीह भी है, क्योंकि यूसुफ के माने हैं जो कोड़ी के मर्ज में हूँ उनको शिफा देने वाला, उनका इलाज करने वाला जो शिफा याब हुए उसको यूसुफ के दूसरे माने हैं कि यूसुफ के दूसरे माने हैं जमा करने वाला।
Yusasaf continued to teach and to preach in Kashmir until he died around the year 80 AD. He was buried in Srinagar. And this rather modest building is, they say, his tomb. The first shrine erected around the site was built in 112 AD. In fact, it is now a shared gravesite. In the 15th century, the Islamic holy man Syed Nazir ud-Din was also buried here. Although both the gravestones under the cloth point north-south in the Islamic tradition, the body of Yusasaf is buried beneath in a grave dug east-west in the Jewish tradition. But this is a sacred site, and short of exhumation, there is no way of discovering whether the body buried here is that of a man who once survived crucifixion. However, next to the sarcophagus are the carved footprints of Yusasaf, and they do have marks or scars on them.
अच्छी उम्र में ये फोत हो गया है और उसके पाँव के निशानात का पत्थर पर उन्होंने कुंदा कर रखे हैं, जैसे कि थे वैसे ही रखे हैं निशान के तौर पर। उनमें जख्मों के निशानात बिल्कुल साफ नजर आते हैं, जो सलीब पर चढ़ाने की वजह से उनके पाँव में जख्म आए थे।
the position of the scars, just behind the toes, do not match each other, but they would align if a single nail was driven through both feet with the left foot placed on top of the right. There are many who believe this to be the tomb of Jesus. If this is the tomb of Jesus, then he spent most of his life in the mountain kingdom of Kashmir. He did not die on the cross. There was no resurrection. He did not ascend into heaven, and he does not sit at the right hand of God. For many Christians, this would be the end of Christianity as we know it. For some, the original story would still have the power to comfort us as we approach death.
For me, the resurrection is about death. The two things that will happen to us all in our life is that we'll be born and that we'll die. They're the two things we know nothing about. And we have this great void before and we have this great void afterwards. So in Jesus' resurrection at the end of the Easter story is the symbolism of our own resurrection, of our own new life. That in many ways is the great strength of Christianity, and I think to kind of get away from it, to get away from that incredibly powerful symbolism of the resurrection that touches each and every one of us because of the reality of what will happen to us, and start debating whether, you know, bones in a tomb matter or whether it actually happened, completely misses the point of Christianity.
But for some theologians, the story of the resurrection is little more than a witness to the grief felt by the disciples at the loss of their leader.
My own working assumption is that Jesus' followers were scattered and discouraged, as they said, and that some of them became convinced that he was actually alive. I don't know how that happened, but certainly it does happen, even today, that many people with a sudden or not sudden loss, bereavement, become convinced that the person that they thought they had lost is somehow alive. And that conviction apparently was very powerful for some of these people, and then it spread.
For others, the resurrection is purely a symbol of the continuing power of Jesus, summed up in the experience of the two disciples who had not recognized the risen Jesus until he broke bread with them.
And their eyes were opened, and they knew him.
The person who wrote that was not trying to describe an apparition. It would be like a preacher on Easter Sunday saying Jesus is among us this morning, and you don't expect people to go looking under the seats for where is he? They understand. It's the presence of Jesus they're describing. In one sense, it's a perversion of resurrection to reduce it to a body coming out of the tomb. Do you not believe? And it's bad history, not just bad theology.
Tomorrow, the turbulent personal journeys of residents at a treatment and rehabilitation centre for serially offending addicts. The only thing that stands between them and lengthy prison sentences. That's Quitters at 10. Tonight, stay with us to be captivated by some of the world's most important illuminated manuscripts. Next.